Redditors who have found dead bodies, what's the story? My wife and I arrived early at an accident that had happened only moments before on the highway. Two other guys and I jumped from our cars to try to help a very old man who was seemingly trapped in his car. I remember thinking he must still be alive because his eyelids flickered rapidly, but also realized that there was not blood flowing from his open wounds. When the medics arrived, they just quickly glanced at him and assured me that he was definitely dead already and I would not need to bother anymore. The only things haunting me afterwards were the smell of burning coolant oozing from the car and his crystal blue eyes. As I found out later, he was a local farmer who came from his field, drove onto the highway from there and just turned into oncoming traffic. Also, as we left, we passed 2 to 3 other cars with injured people who I could have actually have helped if we had not stopped at the very first wreck we saw. This is about 25 years ago. Didn't think about it for a decade. Witnessed a bad car accident Christmas morning about 20 years ago. A van carrying a family crashed on 95 in Florida and apparently nobody was wearing seat belts. Their bodies were all over the road, about 5 or 6 people. That's horrible. I'm a huge stickler about people wearing seat belts when I'm driving. They don't like it, but I don't care, and this is why. I had my friend's neighbor die in my arms. He was about 55 and not in good health. I was sitting on the front step of my friend's house chatting to the neighbor as he worked on his car. Next thing, he stumbled towards me with a strange expression on his face and falls into my arms and dies. I actually saw the light go from his eyes. Tried CPR and rang an ambulance which arrived in minutes, but it turned out he'd had a massive heart attack. Walked out to my girlfriend's living room and her 81-year-old grandpa was slumped over. By the look on his face, I knew he was dead. 911 dispatch still wanted me to try chest compressions even though he had rigor mortis. The sound he made when his body hit the ground after being pulled out of his chair will stay with me until I die. I was an apartment manager for 20+ years. Received a call from a neighbor apartment that the girl next door was screaming, "My mom is dead." I ran up to the apartment with my maintenance techs and didn't even see all the blood on the walls and carpet. Got to the back bedroom and found my resident, a 43-year-old nurse, dead with her throat slit and had been stabbed 40 times. Her 16-year-old daughter had found her when she returned home from school. The victim's ex-boyfriend had found her and her daughter in our city, after they had escaped his terror from 2 states away, and murdered her. He ended up getting life in prison. I had to testify at the trial. This guy was such a freak that he tried to attack the bailiff and the judge during his trial. The thought of meeting the wrong person just once and you're set for a life of fear is just so frightening to me. There was just a case like earlier this month near me where this mom went on a blind date in her own apartment and her kids were there. The guy killed her and told the kids she was sleeping and not to bother her and to get a snack and go to bed. Thankfully, the grandmother of the kids found the mom and not her own kids. I mean, it's tragic either way, but at least kids didn't have to deal with that situation alone. Heartbreaking. So heartbreaking. I was 13 with dad in the car leaving home to a safer place during war. We saw about more than 9 people, including kids, dead covered with blood on the street. My dad stopped the car and told to not look. I wish I listened to him, and he put us something to cover them. Most likely it was a massacre. Edit. Thank you for all these supporting comments. It was in Syria back to 2013. My brother was a teenager when he found our dad. He was working outside in the heat and had a massive heart attack. The saddest thing in my life at that point, other than my dad dying, was my barely a teenager brother telling me he had closed our dad's eyes. My dad passed in my arms. You never quite get over seeing your parent suddenly not be your parent. It was like my father had been replaced with a husk. 'Cause everything that made him my dad was gone in seconds. My family and I were at our father's bedside when he died of cancer. I held his foot while my mom and sister held his hands. It isn't like in the movies where they slump and go quiet. He kept making weird contractions with his jaw, like he was gasping, but there was no sound. The doctor calmly advised us what was going on while it was happening. It was the most excruciating and tear-filled few minutes of my life. When my mother passed years later, I was hundreds of miles away. When I made it there, The hospital asked if I wanted to view the body, and I just couldn't do it. Remembering how strange it was seeing Dad lifeless, I did not want the same memory of Mom. Husk is right. It no longer looks like them. I was about 4, and I was playing in my sandbox. Then I walked further into the yard and found my uncle who hung himself on our balcony. I thought he was trying to play hide and seek until he wouldn't move when I told him I found him and grabbed his foot. That's so sad. I hope you're okay. This was 15 years ago or so, sitting in the parking lot of a Chuck E. Cheese in Bradenton, Florida, waiting for my husband at the time to get out of Publix with Band-Aids for the blisters my shoes made. 6-year-old nephew in the back seat waiting to go into Chuck E. Cheese. A man gets out of his truck to meet a woman. Baby and toddler looked like a custody trade-off. The kids were put in his truck, they hugged, then he pulled a huge butcher knife out and stabbed her at least 10 times. Right in front of my car. I yelled at my 6-year-old nephew to get down, close his eyes and stay down. The man then got gasoline from the back of his pickup, poured it on himself and lit a lighter. This was now next to my window. He looked at me while he was lighting himself. I then jumped out, opened the back door and told my nephew to run as fast as he could into Chuck E. Cheese and get an adult. That man walked on fire what seemed like an eternity. He died, the woman lived. I'll never ever forget his skin that was left on the concrete. Web link. Holy crap, what a story. How awful that she was 13, and he was 33 when they met. And the marriage was legal in Georgia. Effed. My significant other and I lived in a 2-unit apartment building a couple years ago, in the upstairs unit. Downstairs was a middle-aged woman in her late teens or early 20s son. She worked overnights as a nurse, and I think he was doing college part-time or something, not exactly sure. One morning, I'm getting out of the shower, getting ready for work, and I hear the woman downstairs screaming my significant other's name, crying for help. My significant other sleeps like the dead, so they had no idea, but I threw some shorts on and ran downstairs. The neighbor's son was face down in the middle of their hallway. I helped her flip him over, so she could try mouth to mouth, but he was cold to the touch. I remember being startled by how heavily his head hit the ground when we flipped him. I called 911 while she did chest compressions and sobbed, but it was all way too late. Apparently he'd had an asthma attack and collapsed in the middle of the night. He'd been dead for hours by the time his mother got home from work and found him. Edit, spelling. Jesus, the guilt would be awful for that poor woman, even though it's obviously not her fault at all. She ended up dying almost exactly a year later. She had some sort of a heart condition before all of this, and after her son died I believe she stopped taking care of herself so much. She suffered a fatal heart attack in her parked car. Broken heart syndrome is a thing. Extreme stress, trauma or grief can exacerbate an existing heart condition and people like this poor woman can die as a result. My great-aunt died the day she found out that her son had died a few days prior from a tragic fall. Stress cardiomyopathy. It happened to me last year during a time of huge stress and trauma. I was taken by ambulance to hospital with all the symptoms and pain of a heart attack. Your left ventricle balloons. 010 would recommend. I'm doing great now, physically and regarding the trauma too, cherry blossom. Not me but my cousin. She was driving to work one morning when she noticed a light in front of a house that hadn't been there before. But there was something wrong with it. It didn't look like a normal light, it was shining up. She pulled over and looked closer, and could make out the shape of an SUV that had hit a tree and ended up with the nose up the trunk of the tree and front tires off the ground. It had been there so long that there was a covering of snow on it which was sort of filtering the headlights. That was the weird light she saw. She went over and brushed snow off the driver's window, and the driver was dead in his seat. I don't think he died in the crash, I think he crashed because he had died while driving, but I'm not sure. She didn't mention any blood, she only said how blue he was. I was driving to the store to pick up beer for a hockey game get-together or something and saw a homeless guy riding his tricycle with a bunch of stuff on the front of it down a very busy highway-type road. He was riding against the traffic. On my way back there was one ambulance there as he had just been hit by a vehicle, and they were in the process of putting him in a body bag. I don't remember if the person who hit him stopped or not. A epping motorcycle at 180 kilometers per hour invested into my primary school's door. A girl that was missing for 3 days, last seen drunk in a club, turned up on one of the busiest beach bars midday during the summer. Turns out she decided to go night swimming, the club is by the sea as well, and drowned. It was a horrible sight to see, white as a sheet, her hair flowing in the water, face down, arms away, just swaying in the water, still wearing her evening party dress. Peaceful and yet very unnerving. Worst thing was I overheard 2 girls mocking the drowned girl, felt like I could hit them, but decided to bail with my wife. The morbid curiosity and the mob mentality can play tricks on your head. Worst thing was I overheard 2 girls mocking the drowned girl, felt like I could hit them. People react in odd ways to death. I still remember being at work on September 11th and one of my co-workers chuckling and saying cool as we watched the second plane hit. I have never wanted to punch someone so much in my life. I was probably like 8 years old when I looked out the taxi window to see a dead guy who got squashed against a wall because of speeding. Edit. I was 6 years old, not 8. Went to my dad's apartment after a few days of no return text messages or phone calls. Walked up and saw a stack of mail and newspapers by the door and I instantly panicked. I was screaming, "Dad! Dad!" And with one shoulder thrust I broke the door in, hinges busted. I ran though the apt screaming his name, hoping he would be in bed sick and would respond. He didn't. I made it to the bathroom and found him. Dead. Right in front of the tub. I touched him. It was clammy and cold. His face had melted into the rim of the tub. It was almost 10 years ago, but that image still haunts me. I'm just glad I found him and not my other family members. I was working at a supermarket early one morning to get the loading dock ready for our big weekly delivery. Opened the dock door to find a car parked back there. It was a secluded area. Checked the car out. There was a naked couple in the back, still in an embrace. Hell, her legs were wrapped around him. They didn't look right, kind of pale, and no response, even from rocking the car. We called the police. They broke the window to confirm they were dead. It appeared that they had left the car running for the heater, but had backed it up against the wall blocking the exhaust pipe and died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Turns out they were married, just not to each other. It was a small community and word spread like wildfire. When the guy's wife showed up, she said he's lucky he's dead, otherwise I'd kill him. Damn. Last day of school when I was 13 or 14, went to the local park and was running around with some friends when one of us ran up and said he'd found a body. We thought he was bullcrapping until he showed us. A guy had hung himself in a tree above a path, quite high up, so it must have taken some effort, and he must have been there since early morning. I remember it smelled very similar to how war museums smell. Edit. Holy cow. Had no clue this would blow up so much. I'm trying to read and respond to everyone, I swear. Some info: he was 50 and had health issues, which is probably why they didn't do an autopsy. It's been 3 years, but I still miss him so much. If I could say one thing, please take pictures. He hated having his picture taken and only have a couple. I wish I had more. I came home from work to find my fiancé dead on the living room floor. 911 wanted me to do chest compressions even though he was cold. I wasn't strong enough to roll him over, which ended up being a blessing. He'd been there long enough that his blood had settled to the lowest points in his body. Apparently his face was pretty gruesome. Glad that's not the last memory I have of his face. I'm so sorry. I hope you are okay, sad face. Taking it one day at a time. Although it's been 3 years this year, I still miss him a lot. I was skipping school with my buddies, and we went hiking at a nearby state park. There was a good-sized rock outcropping that we were about to climb when a couple of us found a body that looked stuffed into a space between a couple boulders. He was very obviously dead. Some other hikers who were nearby heard our commotion and came over. They were on their way down and agreed to call the cops. We proceeded to climb the rocks and get high as originally planned. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to be the first to know about Red Rabbit Reader's new videos. If you like our videos, please like them on YouTube and share them with your friends. We welcome your comments below. Press to start another of our videos.